God's timing operates from eternity, not urgency. And this is one of the hardest truths for the human heart to accept. We live surrounded by clocks, calendars, deadlines, and expectations. Everything around us trains us to believe that speed equals success and delay equals failure. But God is not governed by minutes or months. He sees the end from the beginning, and He moves from a place of complete vision, not partial understanding. What feels painfully slow to you may already be perfectly complete in God's eternal view. When God delays, it is never because He is uncertain. He is never confused, and He is never trying to figure things out. He waits because His timing is synchronized with outcomes you cannot yet see. If He answered according to urgency, He would respond to emotion rather than purpose. Urgency is born from fear, but God moves from wisdom. Eternity has no panic, no anxiety, no pressure. That is why God's peace often feels so different from human reassurance. It does not hurry to calm you. It invites you to rise above the storm. Many people assume that if something is truly God's will, it must happen quickly. But in the spiritual realm, speed is not a sign of authenticity. Alignment is. God often allows time to stretch, because time reveals motives, purifies desires, and exposes whether we want the gift or the giver more. What looks like waiting on the outside is often deep construction on the inside. God uses time the way a master builder uses foundations. Slow, deliberate, and invisible at first. From an eternal perspective, nothing God has promised is late. The moment God spoke it, it was already finished. What unfolds in time is simply the manifestation of what already exists in eternity. When you understand this, anxiety loses its grip. You stop begging God to move faster and start trusting Him to move wiser. Faith matures when it no longer argues with time. God's perfect timing teaches you to detach from urgency and attach to trust. When you are no longer driven by when, your heart becomes stable. Peace settles in. You learn to rest even before the answer arrives. This is how eternity begins shaping the soul while still living in time. Delay is not denial. It is divine preparation working quietly beneath the surface. When God does not answer immediately, it is not because He has said no, but because He is saying, not yet. The human heart often interprets waiting as rejection, but heaven interprets waiting as formation. God understands that receiving too early can be more damaging than not receiving at all. A blessing released before its time can break a person who is not yet strengthened to carry it. God prepares the promise and the person at the same time. While you are counting days, God is shaping character. While you are watching circumstances, God is rebuilding foundations. Many people want the result without the refinement, but God knows that unprepared success leads to spiritual collapse. That is why He allows seasons where nothing seems to move, yet everything is changing. Delay is the classroom where faith learns endurance and humility learns depth. In waiting seasons, God exposes what truly rules the heart. If peace disappears when the answer delays, it reveals dependence on outcomes rather than trust in God. Delay gently confronts impatience, fear, and hidden pride. It teaches the soul to lean on God's presence instead of His promises alone. This is not cruelty, it is love. God delays because He refuses to give you something that would cost you your peace, your faith, or your identity. What you call delay, God calls protection. He sees traps you cannot see, burdens you cannot yet carry, and responsibilities you are not yet equipped to manage. By holding back, He shields you from premature battles and unnecessary wounds. When the time finally comes, you will look back and realize that the waiting saved you. Delay also stretches spiritual capacity. A small vessel cannot hold a great outpouring. God enlarges the heart through waiting so that when the blessing arrives, it does not overflow destructively, but settles securely. Patience deepens discernment. Stillness sharpens obedience. Silence strengthens trust. Those who understand this stop striving to accelerate God's hand. They stop forcing doors and manipulating outcomes. They learn to rest without answers and worship without evidence. This is where maturity is born. When you can wait without resentment and trust without timelines, you are no longer ruled by delay. You are being prepared for something that will arrive at exactly the right moment. And when it does, you will be ready, steady, and unshaken. Emotional detachment is not coldness, and it is not the absence of love or desire. It is the evidence of spiritual maturity. When a person is emotionally attached to outcomes, their peace rises and falls with circumstances. Joy becomes fragile, confidence becomes unstable, and faith becomes conditional. But when emotional detachment is formed by trust in God, the soul becomes anchored. You still care, you still believe, but you are no longer controlled by fear, urgency, or disappointment. Many people feel strong faith feels intense and emotional, but the deepest faith is calm. Emotional reactions are often rooted in uncertainty, but spiritual strength is rooted in assurance. Detachment does not mean you stop praying. It means you stop panicking. It is the ability to say, God is in control, and truly rest in that truth even when nothing has changed yet. This kind of detachment frees the heart from anxiety and allows faith to operate without interference. God develops emotional detachment to protect your inner life. When emotions dominate, discernment weakens. You rush decisions, force timing, and cling to people or situations that God may be asking you to release. Detachment restores clarity. It creates space for wisdom. When you are not emotionally desperate, you can hear God more clearly and obey Him more confidently. This detachment is born through waiting and surrender. As you walk with God, He slowly loosens your grip on what you once felt you could not live without. Not because He wants to take it away, but because He wants to make sure it no longer defines you. When your identity is rooted in God, not outcomes, rejection no longer destroys you, and delay no longer frightens. Emotionally detached faith does not beg, it trusts. It does not demand signs, it rests in promises. It does not collapse under silence, it grows stronger in it. This is where confidence becomes unshakable. You are no longer moved by praise or crushed by disappointment because your worth is settled. God entrusts greater responsibility to those who are emotionally stable in Him. When blessings come, they do not intoxicate you. When trials come, they do not break you. Detachment keeps the heart steady in every season. This is not distance from God, it is deeper union with Him. When emotions submit to faith, peace becomes permanent, strength becomes quiet, and purpose becomes clear. Faith grows strongest when it is no longer dependent on visible signs or immediate outcomes. In the early stages of belief, the heart often needs evidence. We want reassurance, confirmation, something we can point to and say, God is working. But God never intended faith to live by sight. Signs are helpful, but they are temporary supports. Mature faith is built when those supports are removed, and trust remains standing on its own. When faith depends on outcomes, it becomes fragile. If things improve, faith feels strong. If nothing changes, faith begins to shake. This kind of faith is reactive, not rooted. God allows seasons where prayers seem unanswered and doors remain closed because He is strengthening faith at its core. He is teaching the soul to trust His character, not His timing, and His nature, not His methods. The strongest believers are not those who always see miracles, but those who remain steady when they do not. They understand that God's work is often invisible before it becomes undeniable. Faith that waits without proof develops spiritual endurance. It learns to rest in God's promises, even when circumstances argue otherwise. This is where faith stops being emotional and becomes authoritative. God knows that visible signs can sometimes replace genuine trust. When signs disappear, whatever was built on them collapses. That is why God sometimes removes the very things that once encouraged you. so that your faith can learn to stand on truth alone. In these moments, faith deepens quietly. It becomes less dramatic, less anxious, and far more powerful. When you no longer need immediate outcomes, you gain freedom. You stop interpreting every delay as failure and every silence as rejection. You understand that God's work is not measured in moments but in maturity. Faith becomes patient, confident, and unshakable. It no longer asks, "When will this happen?" but declares, "God is faithful." This kind of faith changes how you live. You obey without guarantees. You give without applause. You trust without evidence. And in doing so, you align with how God Himself operates. God speaks and He waits. He promises and He fulfills in His time. When your faith mirrors this, fear loses its voice. Faith that is no longer dependent on visible signs becomes a deep well, further than a shallow stream. It does not dry up in drought or overflow in excitement. It remains steady, calm, and strong. This is the faith that carries authority, peace, and lasting confidence, even when nothing around you seems to change. God often withholds answers until your identity is anchored in Him and not in results, because answers given too early can quietly replace God Himself. When a person's sense of worth is tied to outcomes, success becomes a source of pride and delay becomes a source of shame. God does not want His children living on emotional highs and lows determined by circumstances. He desires a heart that knows who it is before anything happens, not because of what happens. Many prayers are delayed because God is first dealing with identity. If the answer arrives while insecurity still rules the heart, the blessing will be used to prove worth instead of fulfill purpose. God will not allow His gifts to become substitutes for His presence. That is why He sometimes stays silent. Not to frustrate you, but to draw you deeper. Silence forces the soul to confront this question: who am I if nothing changes? When identity is unclear, waiting feels unbearable. When identity is rooted in God, waiting becomes peaceful. God knows that results can become a false foundation. When people succeed before they are secure, they begin to depend on achievements for confidence. When they fail, they collapse. So God waits until your confidence is no longer negotiable. He waits until you can stand still, without applause, without progress, without validation, and still know you are chosen, loved, and called. This is why some answers come only after surrender. Not surrender of desire, but surrender of dependence. When you no longer need the answer to feel whole, you are finally ready to receive it. God wants you grounded in sonship, not striving for approval. Identity must be settled before assignment is revealed. In these seasons, God teaches you to rest in who He says you are, not in what you accomplish. You learn that obedience matters more than outcomes and faithfulness more than results. This transforms the way you pray. Prayer stops being a negotiation and becomes a relationship. You stop asking God to prove Himself and start trusting Him fully. Once identity is secure, answers no longer control you. Blessings do not inflate you. Delays do not deflate you. You move with quiet confidence because your value is already established. This is the kind of person God entrusts with greater things. When identity is anchored in Him, answers become tools, not trophies, and results become stewardship, not identity. Inner peace is proof that God is working even when circumstances appear silent, because true peace does not come from resolved situations, but from divine alignment. When everything outside remains unchanged, yet the heart is calm, it is a sign that God has already settled something within. This peace is not emotional comfort or positive thinking. It is a spiritual assurance that bypasses logic and overrides fear. It cannot be manufactured, and it cannot be sustained by human effort. It is evidence of God's presence at work beneath the surface. When God begins to move, He often starts internally before anything shifts externally. Circumstances may stay the same, prayers may seem unanswered, and progress may feel delayed, yet suddenly the anxiety is gone. The urgency fades, the fear loosens its grip. This is not resignation, it is strength. Peace settles in, because the Spirit has received a deeper revelation. God is in control, and nothing is out of order. Silence from God does not mean inactivity. In fact, silence is often the environment where peace is formed. God uses quiet seasons to stabilize the heart, to detach it from chaos, and to anchor it in trust. When peace arrives, it becomes a guard over the mind. Thoughts that once produced panic no longer dominate. Worry lose their power. The soul learns to wait without agitation. This peace is a sign that faith has matured. Immature faith demands constant reassurance. Mature faith rests without explanation. When you can remain peaceful without updates, timelines, or visible progress, it shows that trust has moved from the mind into the spirit. You are no longer reacting to circumstances, you are responding from conviction. God values this inner peace because it protects you from making decisions driven by fear. Many mistakes are made in unrest, but peace brings clarity. It allows you to discern God's voice without interference. It keeps you from forcing doors that God has not opened and from abandoning paths that God is still shaping. Inner peace is not passivity, it is readiness. It means your heart is stable enough to receive what God is preparing. When the answer comes, peace ensures it does not overwhelm you. When the breakthrough arrives, peace keeps you grounded. Those who learn to recognize peace as evidence of God's work stop demanding constant signs. They understand that if peace is present, God is near. And if God is near, nothing is delayed, nothing is lost, and nothing is out of His perfect control. Waiting refines character in ways receiving never could, because what you become in the process is often more important than what you receive at the end. When something comes quickly, it may excite you, but it rarely transforms you. Waiting, however, reaches places in the soul that instant fulfillment cannot touch. It exposes impatience, confronts entitlement, and reveals whether your faith is rooted in God or in outcomes. This is why God often chooses the slow path, because transformation requires time. In waiting, strength is developed quietly. You learn endurance, not by moving forward, but by standing still without losing hope. You learn humility by realizing that you cannot control timing, outcomes, or results. Waiting strips away the illusion of self-sufficiency and replaces it with dependence on God. This dependence is not weakness, it is the birthplace of true spiritual authority. Receiving something without preparation can inflate pride or create fear of loss. But waiting shapes the heart to handle success with wisdom and loss with stability. It teaches you how to trust God when emotions fluctuate and circumstances remain unchanged. Character is formed when you continue to obey without rewards, believe without evidence, and remain faithful without recognition. God uses waiting to teach restraint. Many people fail not because they lacked opportunity, but because they lack maturity. Waiting slows you down so that discernment can catch up with desire. It trains you to listen before acting and to seek God's will rather than rushing toward personal ambit. Ion. In this process, motives are purified. You stop wanting things simply because they are available and start wanting what aligns with God's purpose. Waiting also deepens compassion. When you have endured delay, you become patient with others. When you have wrestled with uncertainty, you learn empathy. The heart becomes softer, wiser, and more grounded. These qualities cannot be downloaded instantly. They must be lived into existence. Receiving may change your situation, but waiting changes your nature. And God values nature over position. He knows that a refined character can sustain blessings, but an unrefined one will eventually be crushed by them. That is why waiting is never wasted time. Every moment of delay is shaping resilience, wisdom, and spiritual depth. Those who understand this no longer rush God. They honor the process because they see its purpose. They trust that when the time comes, they will not only receive the promise, they will be able to carry it with grace, humility, and strength. God's perfect timing protects you from receiving what you are not yet ready to steward, because every blessing carries responsibility. What many people call delay is actually divine shielding. God sees beyond the excitement of receiving and looks directly at the weight that comes with it. Influence, provision, authority, relationships, and success all demand maturity. If these arrive before wisdom and stability are formed, the blessing can become a burden rather than a gift. God never measures readiness by desire alone. You may want something deeply, pray for it sincerely, and believe for it passionately, yet still not be ready to carry it well. Readiness is not emotional intensity, it is spiritual capacity. God waits until your character can sustain what your hands are asking for. Without this protection, many answers would damage faith, distort identity, or create unnecessary sorrow. When something arrives too early, fear often follows. People become anxious about losing what they have not yet learned to manage. Pride can also take root, because untested success creates false confidence. God's timing prevents both. By delaying, He builds humility, discernment, and accountability into the soul, so that when the blessing comes, it is stewarded with wisdom rather than consumed with greed or fear. Protection also means guarding you from hidden consequences. You see the surface of what you are asking for, but God sees the full picture, the pressures, the temptations, the spiritual battles, and the sacrifices attached to it. What looks like an opportunity may carry costs you are not yet equipped to pay. God's delay is His way of saying, I love you too much to give this to you before you are ready. In these seasons, God teaches stewardship in smaller forms. He watches how you handle limited resources, quiet seasons, and unseen faithfulness. If peace, integrity, and obedience remain intact when little is happening, it shows readiness is growing. Stewardship is proven long before increase arrives. Those who understand this stop resenting God's timing. They realize that protection is often disguised as patience. They stop measuring progress by speed and start measuring it by stability. When the answer finally comes, it does not overwhelm them or pull them away from God. Instead, it draws them closer because they are prepared to carry it with gratitude, discipline, and reverence. God's perfect timing ensures that when you receive, you do not merely possess. You manage wisely, honor God fully, and remain whole. Spiritual authority increases when you stop forcing doors and start discerning seasons, because authority is born from alignment, not aggression. Many people confuse effort with faith and motion with obedience. They push, strive, and pressure situations, believing that persistence alone will produce God's will. But forcing doors often leads to exhaustion, confusion, and regret. God's authority rests on those who move with Him, not ahead of Him. When you learn to discern seasons, you begin to understand that not every good opportunity is a God opportunity. Some doors are open simply because you have the strength to push them, not because God has ordained them. Discernment teaches you to wait for peace instead of pressure, clarity instead of urgency. This kind of waiting is not passive, it is deeply active in the spirit. You are listening, watching, and aligning your heart with God's timing. Forcing doors reveals impatience and fear of missing out. Discerning seasons reveals trust. When you trust God, you believe that what is meant for you cannot pass you by. This confidence produces authority. You no longer chase validation or scramble for control. You move calmly, decisively, and without panic because you know God governs your steps. Spiritual authority is strengthened in restraint. The ability to say no when something looks promising, but feels misaligned, requires maturity. God entrusts influence to those who can wait without resentment and move without hesitation when the time is right. Authority grows when obedience becomes more important than outcomes. When a season is right, doors open without force. Provision flows without manipulation. Favor rests without striving. This is how God operates. He removes the struggle so that His glory is evident. Those who understand seasons do not waste energy trying to revive expired chapters or accelerate unfinished ones. They let God close what needs closing and open what must open. Discerning seasons also protects the heart from burnout. Forced progress drains the soul, but aligned progress strengthens it. Authority is not loud or frantic, it is quiet and settled. It comes from knowing when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to be silent. As you learn to move in seasons, people begin to sense stability in you. Your words carry weight. Your decisions produce fruit. Your presence brings peace. This is spiritual authority in its purest form. Not dominance, not control, but alignment with God's rhythm. When you stop forcing doors, you discover that the right ones open effortlessly, and when they do, you walk through them with confidence, clarity, and lasting strength. True confidence comes from alignment with God's will, not control over outcomes, because confidence rooted in self or circumstances is always fragile. Many people believe they are strong when they can manipulate situations, meet goals, or influence results, but this strength is temporary. It depends on factors beyond the soul's control. Real confidence, the kind that remains unshaken in storms, is spiritual. It comes from knowing that your steps are guided by God's wisdom, and that His plans cannot fail, no matter what appears in the natural. When your confidence is tied to God's will, you no longer panic when things do not happen on your timeline. You do not fear silence, delay, or setbacks. You understand that these are not signs of failure, but opportunities for alignment. The heart that rests in God's timing carries authority because it is anchored in purpose, not in the unpredictable outcomes of life. Confidence rooted in alignment produces inner peace, patience, and a steady focus. Even when the world seems chaotic, control over outcomes can tempt the soul into striving, forcing, or manipulating circumstances to feel secure. But when God is in control, striving becomes unnecessary. The person who understands this learns to surrender effort to obedience. This does not mean inactivity. It means operating in harmony with God's direction rather than reacting to fear. Each action becomes prayerful, purposeful, and effective because it flows from alignment, not impulse. Confidence aligned with God's will is also resilient. It is tested in waiting, in setbacks, and in uncertainty, but it does not collapse. Those who develop this confidence remain faithful in prayer, diligent in service, and consistent in character, regardless of visible results. They understand that God's favor is not dependent on circumstance, but on faithfulness. And this knowledge produces unshakable boldness. Finally, alignment-based confidence transforms relationships, decisions, and vision. It frees the believer from comparison, anxiety, and desperation. You no longer measure success by what happens, but why, whether your heart and actions are in sync with God. This kind of confidence does not boast, it acts quietly, trusts deeply, and moves courageously. When you live in alignment with God, confidence becomes a reflection of His power in you. A power that is steady, enduring, and unstoppable, even when the world around you is unpredictable. Everything we have explored points to one undeniable truth. God's timing is never accidental, never rushed, and never delayed beyond what is necessary for your growth, protection, and purpose. Every silence, every waiting season, every unanswered question is a divine strategy shaping your character, refining your faith, and preparing your heart to receive what you are truly ready to steward. You are being trained to trust Him, not because of what you see, but because of who He is, and that trust is the foundation of power, peace, and authority in your life. When you learn to detach from outcomes, rest in His promises, and align fully with His will, you discover a strength that cannot be shaken by circumstance. Your faith becomes steady, your confidence unshakable, and your peace unmovable. God's timing is perfect because it is designed not just to give you what you ask, but to make you who you need to be to handle it wisely and faithfully. So stop rushing, stop forcing, stop letting fear and impatience control your heart. Stand firm in trust while steadily in obedience. And embrace the season you are in. What is meant for you will not pass you by, and what arrives at the right time will bring blessings beyond what your mind can comprehend. God's timing is perfect, and when you live in harmony with it, you step into a life of divine alignment, unstoppable faith, and unshakable purpose. The promise is not just that things will happen, it is that you will be ready. And being ready is everything.